In Nehemiah, or Nehemiah in English. I learned that word, you see. We finished chapter 6 last time. Last time we were talking about, I mentioned it quickly, but a little bit about the whole dynamic of all of the enemies that wanted to stop Nehemiah from what he was doing of building the walls. And they tried different ways to do it. They had false prophets that they actually hired, because remember, there were prophets. So they hired people to go and to say as if they were prophets. Now, that might sound crazy because, first of all, we're not used to prophecy today, but in a time there was prophecy. And you always wonder, like, what does the false prophet look like? Right? Does he look like a bad guy? No. He's dressed in white. He looks very, very righteous. And as I'm prone to do in this class, to make parallelisms between the world today, you need to remember that the guys who are saying very bad things are very
we lost his
cloaked in self-righteousness. So there were these false prophets that the enemies of the Jews hired to go and to tell Nehemiah, listen, this and that, go hide in the temple. He said, I'm not a Kohen. I can't go into the temple area. So why are you telling me that? You're obviously not the real deal. And the various ways you talked about last time, how you see through a false prophet, I think we talked about that last time, because it's very crucial. I mentioned that, I know. Say, you know what the problem I'm having here is that my phone keeps people keep calling me and it keeps making it go to mute. That's why I put do not disturb first, but then I was muted before also. So hopefully this person will stop calling me, and we'll be able to continue. All right, so good. So anyway, that's what we saw in chapter 6 last time, that Nehemiah stayed strong. They tried to dissuade him, and they tried to threaten him, intimidate him. And ladies and gentlemen, that is what I said last time about you got to know the truth and stay strong, because people will intimidate you. People will try to scare you. People will say these different things, tell you you're crazy, whatever it is. And that's just the way it is. It's one of the funniest things in the world. It's like, when you talk about, let's say, right and wrong, there's only one thing I could tell you about every single new revelation of truth in the world. Before it was believed by everyone, it was believed by no one. The earth is round. What are you, crazy? The earth revolves around the sun. What are you, crazy? I don't got to look into Galileo's telescope. I know that's not true. And that's like the mass hysteria, that people have, because they all jump into something and they don't actually look and see the truth. And therefore, it's very crucial for us. This is what Nehemiah did. He was not threatened. He was not going to get bullied by people. And that's what we got up to in chapter 6. All right, now to chapter 7. In chapter 7, his tenaciousness, his steadfastness led him to finish building the walls of Jerusalem and to put the doors in. Okay, I know doors sound funny to us because how hard the door. But if you go to Jerusalem today, even you'll see the size of the gates. They're not little doors. They're not doors that two guys come and stick on the thing. They're giant gates. So they had to put the doors on. They completed this. They put the doors on. And now in chapter 7, verse 1, he started now assigning the Levites and the Kohanim all their jobs in the temple. Because beforehand, remember, they were busy guarding not to be disturbed and killed by the enemies that were surrounding them. Now, finally, they got this wall and these doors. And you have to understand that it was always that was the protection in those days. We'll see in a second, obviously, because God's your protection. But we'll see what that means. But like when you went in the world of nature, that protected walled cities is a phenomenon that we all grew up in with open cities. But in the olden days, you needed a wall to protect your city. So once he finished that, he started moving on to the process of doing the service in the temple in the proper way. Okay, now he chooses his people. And verse 2, he chooses Hananiah. He says, these are people of truth. People have fear of God. And that's, again, the same business. He knows that there's a lot of politics. There's a lot of shenanigans in the world. And it didn't start today. There are been from time immemorial people that have different motivations, and they play different games to go and to uproot the truth. And a person needs to be strong, and he had to have the right people in place, and he did that. Now he tells them in verse 3 that the gates of Jerusalem are only opened at midday, and the guards need to stand there and check who comes in. Now in America, we don't realize this. When I'm in Israel, so if you go to the mall, you go to a store, there's a guard standing there checking that you're not got to bring a bomb in. America is like, and this is one of the problems why Americans don't understand the concept of war, because the war is over there. It's over there. So, okay, so we should do this, we should do that. And even in the country right now, people who don't live on border towns in America, yeah, okay, there are people rushing across the border, but what's the problem? Because they don't feel it themselves. They don't live in a reality. This reality was the enemies could walk in and wreak havoc and kill people. So they had to guard the door. When they opened the gates, people could leave Jerusalem or come into Jerusalem. The guards were there watching every individual that came in. Now, in verse 4, it says that the city was large and the people were small, and there weren't a lot of houses built. Now, the question is, why does the verse say that? It's like, it seems out of place. Doesn't seem like. And the reason is because we're going to go through a whole long discussion now in the next chapter, next two chapters, really most of this chapter, where Nehemiah is going to go and start again relating to us the people that came to Jerusalem from the Babylonian exile. He starts telling us the families again. Now, I said to you once before, I think it was last week even, I explained to you, you understand, when we're reading the Torah, whether it's the 5 books, whether it's the prophets, whether it's the writings, they all are written with divine. The 5 books of Torah is written. God puts the words in Moshe's mouth. The prophets receive a prophecy, and the books of the writings are what's called divine inspiration, where the person has entered a level of understanding that he is seeing it from a high perspective, and he's connecting with God's thoughts, so to speak. And therefore, what he says has many, many levels of truth. I explained that last time. That's why every word when we read in the book of the Torah, there's tremendous things we learn out and Kabbalistically and other things. But we have to also, you have to understand, everything has to make sense in the simple explanation too. You can't go and people say, oh, it means this. No, what's the simple explanation? The simple explanation right now is that Nehemiah is going to go through a long list of the people's names. And the question is, why is he doing that now? So yeah, there are deeper reasons, but why is he listing these names of all the people that came? And even more so, it's weird because we had this list in Ezra. In the previous book, remember, Ezra and Nehemiah came earlier. This book is written in the 20th year it starts. Nehemiah comes in the 20th year of the king Artaxerxes, which is another name for Darius the Persian, and Ezra came many years earlier. So he starts now repeating the names of the people that came in with Ezra in the beginning. Why is he repeating it? It was actually said in the book of Ezra. So why is he repeating it here? I needed a base explanation. Not only that, but if you read the book carefully, you'll see he lists the names of the people, and then he lists the numbers in each family. And if you cross-reference them to the book of Ezra, the numbers aren't always the same. In most cases, the numbers in the book of Nehemiah are more than the numbers of those per family that came in the book of Ezra. So what's going on? Just a basic understand what's happening here. What's happening here is, and this explains why the book says why Nehemiah wrote that there were very few people in the land, because we're going to see in chapter 11, as Nehemiah is going to set up a system that from every family, people will live in the city of Jerusalem. And that's why it's an introduction. The introduction is that Nehemiah saw they settled the holy city, but people weren't living there. It had been in ruins from the destruction. That they'll come back, but it's a city. People were agricultural. They had to grow things. They had to live in a place where there were fields. And so people were going to go and live in other places outside the city. So he saw the city is small. He needs to populate the city. So what he's going to do now is he's going to repeat the people, the names of the families that came, because we're going to see in chapter 11, he's going to take from each family a certain amount that he's going to tell them to live in the city of Jerusalem. And it's a big thing. It's a big thing. Cheyenne, I saw your message. I didn't forget about what you sent to me. I'll explain to you why my delay is, but I reminded of this because I used to live in the old city of Jerusalem. I was blessed to live in the old city of Jerusalem for 5 years. And I remember there was, and I didn't know what this was until a couple of years later, but there were these rabbis that lived there. I was very close with them. I was younger. I was in my 20s, and they kept telling me, make sure to buy a house in the old city. I live in the old city. Live in the old city. And the old city of Jerusalem is one of the most incredible places in the world, of course. It's also challenging now because you don't have fields. Everyone's together. It's like, it's all paved. And then you have tourists coming in day and night. Sometimes you feel like you're living in a fishbowl. It's like, you hear every single language all the time. People pointing, oh, look at that guy. Look, he's wearing this black thing on his head. Well, doesn't he look interesting? And they're saying it in German, so you know what they're saying, So, but you figure it out after a while. So these guys, these rabbis that were there, they always say to me, come, buy a house, live here, stay here, make sure. And then I saw years later a book that was written by their rabbi, which I'll explain more today, the Vilna Gaon, the rabbi is called the genius from Vilna, Eliyahu, Vilna, and he, Kramer's, they call him the Vilna Gaon. He was an incredible genius. Just like I can't even. I'm not going to tell you the stories because you probably won't believe them. They're just bizarre. But the reason why, you can't even believe it because to just say one thing, I understand. There's, I can show you some books. So if you look some of my books around my house, okay, I have different sections of my books. I have 3 rooms, 3 full rooms of books. I have thousands of books. Thank God, Baruch Hashem. And there are thousands upon thousands of Torah books. The Talmud is one of the central books that we have. And I'll pick up a Talmud. There's a Talmud here. There's a Talmud. Okay. Now, there was a test they used to do. This was not for a genius. This was for a regular person. They would take a Talmud. They'd open it up. Okay. Let's go. Open it up to page. Let's start from the first page. The first page of the Talmud. They'd open it up. This was a test that was done to any student coming along. Another time, they'd say, okay, listen, you have all these pages here for this book of the Talmud. We're taking a pin. We're going to put a pin through, imaginary pin, through this letter here. The letter Nun in the 8th line of this book of the Talmud. So this was the test they would give for students. It's called the pin test. Imagine we're putting a pin through this book on this letter. You need to tell me every single letter that it's going through in every page. What letter we go through on this page? What letter goes on this page? You need to tell me every single letter that the pin would go through on every page of the next 200 pages of the book.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's like, and I remember I sat with one guy. He was a guy who was a real genius, and he played this game with me. Just to show the Talmud is there's 60 volumes of this, 60 volumes, and I would pick a book. And I saw this. I tell him the last word on the page. He tells me the next page in any book. So those are regular people. The genius from Vilna was completely a different thing. He was just at 5 years old, 6 years old, he was teaching the highest class to people in their 90s. He was like incredibly brilliant. And he was a great sage. He lived in Lithuania. And this is important because this is going to tie into what I'm talking about with Nehemiah today to understand the process and why I picked this book, Nehemiah, to learn Nezra. He, but as an older man, he decided to go and to come to the land of Israel. This is in the early 1800s. The problem is the land of Israel was desolate. It was desolate for years. I always quote you the Mark Twain story of when he traveled through, Israel in 1850, or what it was exactly. And he was like, I never saw such a desolate land. There was no boats going there. There was no planes going there. So the Vilna goes an old man. He decides he's going to walk from Lithuania to the land of Israel. He picked up and he walked, and he did it twice in his life. The first time he saw that things kept happening, and he realized God does not want him to go. And he turned back and he came back. Tried it a second time, thought maybe the time was right then. Started walking again from Vilna, which is Lithuania, to Israel. And also he saw supernaturally God did not want to go, wasn't time to go. And he didn't go. But he sent his students there. And a book came out that one of his students wrote called Kol HaTur, a fascinating book where he describes the whole messianic process, how it's going to unfold practically. And he told his students, he says, God does not want me to go for, the various reasons. We could talk about it some other time. God didn't let Moshe go either. Moses couldn't go either. If Moses would have gone in, it would have been the ultimate redemption, and we weren't ready for it. So who knows if the Vilna would have gone in, what it would have meant. But he says, I'm not being allowed to go, but you'll be allowed to go. And you go, and when you go, you settle the old city of Jerusalem. And then in the book, it said, and make sure you find people of like mind to be with you in the old city. And then I understood why they kept saying to me, make sure you buy in the old city of Jerusalem. I realized that they were students from the Vilna Gaon from the early 1800s, student of the student. And they had this tradition, and they are very, they really run the old city of Jerusalem today, both spiritually and physically, largely. And they settled the land. And they settled the old city as the holy city. But what happens is that people, it's you're living in the city, the holy spot. It's amazing, the greatest place on earth. At the same time, it's sometimes hard because if you want to grow things, well, you can. If you're an agricultural society, you don't have a field in the middle of Jerusalem. So Nehemiah is now listing all of the people that came for the purpose we're going to see in chapter 11, where he's going to take a certain percentage, we'll talk about, from each family, and he has them be their representatives to live in the old city of Jerusalem, within the walls of the city. Okay? So that's why we're repeating these numbers. Okay? That's the first thing I want you to understand. Obviously, there are deeper reason as I taught you last time. But the simple basic reason is because this is a process. He's explaining now, these are the people, and this is what we're going to take from each group, and this is what's going to build for us the city of and that's why the verse first said there weren't a lot of people there, because he realized he needs to go and to fill the city up, and this was the proper thing to do, and this was the idea that the sages tell us that God put in his head. He understood that this is what he has to do to build up the city of Jerusalem on the return to Zion. Now, the second thing I wanted to say, those who notice, because I know we have some very astute people here. If you look at some of the names of the families and the numbers of each, you'll notice that sometimes they're not exactly the same number. It's very interesting. Why not the same number? If he's giving me the count that Ezra gave years earlier, why are some of the numbers changed? In most cases, what happens is the numbers are greater in the count of Nehemiah, which is years later, than the count of Ezra, which is supposed to be the same count. So why are the numbers different? So the main reason why the numbers are sometimes different is like this. There were different people that came from Babylon, returned to Zion. And you got to understand this, because this is really fascinating today. Where should Jews live? Well, Jews should live in the land of Israel. And they should, and there are laws about being a, if you live in a different country, how you have to be a positive, upstanding, grateful person in the country you live in. Special laws that you have to be very careful. If a person breaks the law of the land, he's also breaking a Torah law, because God requires the Jew living in another country to be a patriotic member of that country, or leave if you don't like it. But ultimately, the Jews need to live in the land of Israel. That's their place. So now what happened was there were Jews living in Babylon who were returning. And that's what's happening today. People living in America, the four corners of the earth, they are returning to the land of Israel. But they return slowly, and they return in different ways, in different modalities, and different things move them. One thing that moves them is you live in France, and for years you've been the anti-Semitism, so that moves people to go. And that, happens in America too. Different things move the Jews to go and say, this isn't the home I need to go to. So what happened was that there were Jews living in Babylon, Persia area, which is Iraq and Iran today. And they were there for 70 years. The exile from Babylon was 70 years. And then they became comfortable there. Not only did they become comfortable, I want you to understand this. There were different stages of the exile of King Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is not the name of a ship in the Matrix. I know that's what they say. But Nebuchadnezzar was, for those of us who need to know, was a very bad guy, but he was the king of Babylon. And he destroyed the first temple. He was a very evil person. And he exiled the Jews in different stages. In one stage, he exiled the Jews. He exiled the first stage. He exiled the leaders of the Jews. That was called the exile of Jeconiah. I don't know how to say in English. Joachim, maybe? Joachim? I don't know. Jeconiah. That was that, and that happened before the main destruction of Jerusalem. And the reason for that, even though he wasn't planning this, but God was planning this, was because God wanted the sages to come to Babylon first to set up a Torah center. And then when the Jews got exiled and the temple was destroyed, they walked into a functional religious society. But now when he exiled them, he exiled the important people, called in the Torah, the Cheresh Mazgir, the wise leaders, Daniel. Right? Daniel, he brought Daniel to be his advisor because he saw, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. He saw from the book of Daniel, you see these great leaders of Israel. He saw they were, and he made them his advisors. Years later, he brought the rest of the people. Same thing in the return. People went back for different reasons. So in the book of Ezra, the families are listed. But the numbers generally represent the ones who wanted to come to be in the city of Jerusalem, within the Holy Wall. Those were the numbers of each family that Ezra recorded. Nehemiah, there were some, though, that came to land of Israel. I'm not saying that didn't have good intentions, but their intentions were to get a place to, a farm, and it was farms. I don't know how they were going to do it, but the place outside the city of Jerusalem, and they were going to live there. Those were generally not included in Ezra's count. When Nehemiah makes his count, he includes those people also. So that is one of the main reasons for the disparity in the numbers, that sometimes Ezra was counting the family, but let's say he said, I don't know, 1,000 people from this family, but really 2,000 came, but he didn't count the ones that weren't coming for the city of Jerusalem. In the book of Nehemiah, if you read the verse carefully, you see it says the ones who came to Jerusalem and to Judah, or Judea, which was the outer lying area. So he counted people that were part of a family, but came and were not going to be living necessarily in the city of Jerusalem. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why sometimes there's a disparity. There's a few more points about it, but unless you want to, I'm not going to necessarily get into it right now. But that's what happens. So Nehemiah is repeating the people, and he's giving us the count. Now, I want to just share with you one other thing about some of the disparities of the numbers, because this is very important to understand this. Because one reason I'm learning the book of Nehemiah with you is because the book of Nehemiah the book of Ezra parallels the redemption that's happening right now. So one of the other reasons why some of the numbers are different is because there are people that came, families that came, and then there were individuals that kept coming afterwards. And that's why if you look at the total number that Nehemiah and Ezra give, the total number is higher than the individuals, because the individuals are the families who came from the families, but individual people kept coming. People kept floating in. So they counted the main families who came. Ezra, the main families who came to settle in Jerusalem. Nehemiah, the main families and who came for Jerusalem in the city of Judea. But there were always people always flowing and coming along and coming. And that's why, in the end, some of the numbers have to be understood, because even though the total number is the same, the individual numbers sometimes change because sometimes people came afterwards and people were still coming. Now, why do I want to stress that point to you? Because I told you earlier the story of the Rabbi, the Vilna Gaon, who sent his students to Jerusalem. And you should just know he wasn't the only rabbi who did that. In the early 1800s, after the Jews had been exiled, and there was a arousal that God created in the hearts of the Jews, it was time to return to Israel. And people who learn history and think that the return to Israel started the Zionist movement in the early 1900s are completely wrong. It's not what happened at all. Jews have been living in Israel, even in small numbers, always. I told you last week about Nachmanides, who went in the 1400s, and he set up his synagogue there, which is still there today. I mean, it's been changed a lot, but synagogue on his name, where he established, is in the old city of Jerusalem. I used to pray there regularly, and Jews always lived there in small numbers. In the 1800s, there was the sentiment that God put into the hearts of the Jewish people. And I'll tell you a little bit about it. I can't say too much about it because it gets very, very deep and very, very mystical. I'm not sure I could say, but if you look at the world was created in 6 days, and the 7th day is the Sabbath. Right? That's what we learn. In the Jewish calendar, we are in the year 5,872. So right now, what happens is we are 5,800 something years into creation. So that means that we are what's called in the sixth day, right? If you learned Einstein's relativity, you know time is relative. So each day parallels 1,000 years. And we are now going into the time of the sixth day when Adam and Eve are created and moving into the seventh millennium, which is Shabbos. That's why Mashiach has to come within less than 200 years. So the rabbis started to sense the power of the redemption was here. And the Vilna Gaon sent his students, the Baal Shem Tov, who was the rabbi, who was the head sage of the Hasidic movement at the time, who founded the movement, which is, again, not the same thing. It's all one Torah, but just different emphases. They started sending their students to Jerusalem and to Israel. And what happened was a group called the Chovei Tzion, the lovers of Zion. And every single town in Europe had individuals that would go to Jerusalem, go to Israel, and they were called the first settlers of Israel because they were going in mass, but they had no money. There was again, as I told you last time, there was no agriculture. There was the country was desolate. It starts getting built in the 1800s when different Jewish people are investing and sending the Jews back to reestablish it. But the first people coming there didn't have money. They used to have in every town in Europe a collection box to gather. And in Europe, they were usually poor, because they weren't allowed to go to schools, they weren't allowed to have own land. There were a lot of things they weren't allowed to do in different places, different times in Christian Europe. But they would gather money and they would send it to support the Jews that would go into the land of Israel. And I met a descendant, from that, like someone who lives in Israel. My mother, Allah Shalom, she told me that his father was. His grandfather was one of the people they sent from his town before 1948, in the early 1900s or late 1800s, they sent him to live in Israel. So why am I telling you this? Because that's the incredible process that's happening. And I'm going to show you this more as we go on to today's class. But what happens is that there's different ways the redemption can happen. One is a supernatural, miraculous way, like happened with Moses and Joshua. Joshua walked in, they went around Jericho, the walls sunk into the ground, and the whole thing was supernatural. But the second redemption, the redemption of Ezra and Nehemiah that we're talking about, it did not happen that way. It could have. The sages said if we would have been worthy of it, it would have happened that way. But it happened in a much more natural process. It happened through a process of building the wall, fighting the enemies, and you had to see God's hand in it. And the end of the last chapter, it's amazing. We read, and I pointed this out, that the enemies of the Jewish people who kept trying to stop them from building the wall, it said, it was very fascinating. I think I mentioned this last time. It says in the verse, it says that when it says here in chapter 6, verse 16, it says, when the enemies of the Jewish people saw, they fell, their spirit fell. They became distraught. And the verse says, and they knew that from God this whole thing had happened. Now, I want to tell you something, and this is why I speak to you all, because if you saw that this happened through God, I hope everyone on this chat, and this is what we call it, I hope anyone who hears this says, yay, that's great. Wow, I see God's bringing back the people to the land, and they're going to build a temple to be good for everyone, to be truth and kindness and love in the world. How did these people see it recognize it was from God and be so distraught because they didn't want it. They didn't want to put their lot in with God and his people. And therefore they were actually fighting God. And so what happened now is that Nehemiah has finished building the walls, finished putting the walls, the doors, the gates of Jerusalem, and now he's moving the attention to doing the service in the temple, and he has to rebuild the city. And what he has to do is he has to take the people, every family, and make sure there is a sanctification of every family who are going to come and live in the holy city. This process did not happen in a supernatural way. It happened in hidden miracles, which are our lives. Our lives are hidden miracles. You got to see God in your life. That's the way the second redemption happened. And it could happen the first way. Talmud says if we would have married, it would have happened. And this book I told you, where the Vilna Gaon, this rabbi, describes what's going to happen when he sends his students to Israel. He explains that it's going to happen in this way. He explains it. It's fascinating because he goes through the details of it. It's literally shaking. I mean, he gives dates. He says 1948. I mean, he says it. He wrote it in the year, and he has a whole calculus how he figures out. It's shocking. When you read, you're like, and when you read it, and he explains how he knew, you're like, oh my gosh. He has the calculation of when the Jews will come to the land, as they'll come, but it's happening in a non-supernatural way at this point. We still don't know how the temple will come down, if it'll be supernatural or not, so we don't know that yet. That depends on us. Depends on the actions, depends on many factors. But the return to Zion that happened here in the story of Nehemiah is paralleling the return to Zion today. Okay, good. Questions, comments, what I said so far. So he lists the people. And he describes now how many there were. He talks about what they donated to the temple. Commentaries say if you contrast the numbers, they're also a little different because this was a second donation to be made to build the temple after he had built the walls and after he had secured the city. And again, it's like a funny thing because really, and this is what I want you to understand, and I'm going to get to this point at the end of this class today because it's just a fascinating point. What we all would think we want is I don't got to build the walls. I don't got to build the gates. An enemy walks in, boop, a lightning bolt comes down, fries him. That's what we would all think. That would, to us, what we think would be the revelation of God in the world. And yes, in terms of the Torah, in times of Moshe, during the desert, things functioned very much like that. But that has a problem to it in a lot of ways. Now, I'll give you an example. Let's say you had a person do something that was wrong. You knew that it was wrong. They come to you and they speak badly about someone. They gossip, they say bad things. And all of a sudden, you see a lightning bolt coming from the sky and turns them into fried potatoes. And that keeps happening. Let me ask you a question. How long would it take for you never to say anything bad? A second? One person? Two? So what happens is there's no free will at that point. There's no free will. Because at that point, when everything is so revealed, everyone sees it. When you have to look more deeply and you say, wait a minute, it looks like the reason why they are surviving because they were good builders. The Israeli army is really good. Blah, 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 blah. No, it's not the Israeli army. It's not. If you want to go and get shaken up and see incredible things, you go read some stories about soldiers in the Israeli army in the Six-Day War. It wasn't because they were such a great army. Yeah, technically they have good. Now, thank God, they have a good army, but it's not the army. They had these stories of people, of like, you know, the craziest stories where all of a sudden this guy's in a tank and the Egyptians are coming and he's finished, and all of a sudden they think something happened. They think it's a trap. They turn around, and they run. I mean, crazy stories like this. If you read any of these soldiers who were fighting in the Six-Day War or the Yom Kippur War, I mean, that's not the Yom Kippur War. Yom Kippur War, the army was sleeping, meaning that what happened was Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the year, and they called the reserves up and they went back to the Israel, and they thought that what was going to happen was, you know, Golden Meir and the leaders thought, they're not going to attack us. They already saw the Six-Day War. They're not going to do it, but they're stupid. They're not going to. But they did. And they knew that the Jews were all in the synagogue praying, and they knew they had very few people guarding, and they attacked. And they start going in, and the truth was that there was no one there. And they could have gone straight all the way across the country, God forbid, and overrun the country. And in the middle, something happened. There's stories about things that they thought they saw and heard. All of a sudden, they turned around, started running. They thought it was a trap. And you can read these stories. And that's how they got the army. They put the army together to defend because they would have been destroyed. So what's happening is that you look at it and you say, oh, did I do this? And think about anything in our lives. The hardest place is that when I do something, there's a place where I say, it's me. Can you see that really God is the director of everything? It's very hard when you're the one who actually does it. So when they built the walls here, they felt, we built it, but they didn't feel that way. They could have, but they didn't. They realized that this is the work, and in the whole concealed reality that it looks natural, it looks that it's not. And that's even the enemies of the Jewish people realize, well, wait a minute, this shouldn't have happened. How'd this happen? It's the same way today. I remember I heard a story once. There was a guy, a Jewish cadet in West Point. And I forgot who told me the story, but he went to one of his teachers and he complained. He said, why don't you ever study the battles that the Israelis fought? Maybe it's anti-Semitism. Why? Well, you study all the other battles. You don't study any of the battles that the Israelis fought to defend themselves. You know what he said? He says, we can't. It doesn't make any sense. You never should have won them. It doesn't make any sense. We can't. There's nothing we could take from them because it's illogical. Yeah, he did that, but why that should work and how it would ever work again, I don't know. Thank God we know the answer. That's the answer. The answer is you got to see past that, see the real source of everything. Okay, so that is chapter 6. Chapter 6 recants and repeats over the people, which Nehemiah is now going to take from every family and put them into the city of Jerusalem. And it talks about how he's reestablishing now the service in the temple. End of chapter 6, verse 73. I'm sorry, chapter 7. Chapter 7. It says, now, Vayishu Kohanim Levim, they established all of the people back in the city, and they're now going to really be able to do the service, because even though they returned earlier, and even though Ezra built the temple, started the tabernacle, but they were being oppressed. Now they got the wall, they got the surroundings, they got the people, they united the people. And we talked in last week's chapter They made sure the people gave charity and they helped the poor. They were all united as one in the service of God. And now they're ready to take it to the next level. Chapter 8. People gathered. And now Ezra is going to read the Torah to the people. Now, everyone has a Torah. We have a Sefer Torah. We have, thank God, there's many Sefer Torahs that were written. The original Sefer Torah was written by Moshe. He wrote 12 and gave it to every tribe. And there's many, many, many laws to write a Sefer Torah. And that's why we don't have mistakes. It's crazy when you think about it. Today you have modern technology. How do you have a Torah they found in Yemen and a Torah they found on the other side of the world? People that didn't see each other for thousands of years and it's exactly the same? How's it possible? There's many, many laws to write a Torah. You have to have an established Torah in front of you to write it. You can't write anything by heart. You have to write it. But there was always certain times where individuals read the Torah, and then when they had a mass assembly of reading the Torah, there's actually a law in the Torah called Hakel. At the end of the 7th year, the Shemitah year, the king would put a platform, and he'd read the whole last book of the Torah, the book of Deuteronomy. He'd read for the whole people, the book of Dvarim. And it was a very powerful thing when people gathered and read the Torah. After they established a wall, Ezra, who was the Kohen, he read to the Jewish people. Now, it says it was in the 7th month. On the first day, Ezra gathered the people. Now, generally, the mitzvah of reading the Torah for the whole entire nation publicly is in the holiday of Sukkot, but here it was started earlier, just to strengthen the people. And Ezra starts reading the whole Torah to the people after they established their walls. And they really have had a spiritual revival. And that's the point I want to get you to understand that this spiritual revival is going in stages, very much like it's happening today. I remember when I lived in the old city of Jerusalem, it really wasn't such a religious city in the beginning. The people that were designing it were designed to be an artist colony. Is that crazy? The guy I rented my first house from in the old city was a great-grandson of Theodor Herzl. Theodor Herzl, who started modern Zionism, was an ignoramus in Judaism. He didn't know anything. He was a secular Jew. And, he tagged on to what was happening already in the movement. But this guy I rented the house from was a very nice guy, but he didn't really know anything. He was the guy who owned the house I rented, and he bought it years ago. He was like, old time right now. And he thought the old city of Jerusalem was going to be an artist colony. And it turned out to be the holy city of Jerusalem like it's supposed to be. And now every year you see it's more and more religious people. Jerusalem has turned into a religious city. The majority of Jerusalem is now a religious city, which wasn't like that many, many years ago. So that happens in stages sometimes. So same thing here. Now was the revival. People were starting to get there. And Ezra now reads to the people, gathers the people, and he reads the book of the Torah to them on the first day of the 7th month. Now, what is the first day of the 7th month in the Jewish calendar? So that's a holiday. It's called Rosh Hashanah. Okay, so now the backdrop of understanding what he's reading to them and their response is very important. He reads to the people in the square. This is a public reading for all the people who have returned to Zion now. People understand. He reads to them, and they set a platform, and he's reading, and he has the sages to the right and left, and he's reading. Okay, and he blesses, praises God, and he starts reading to the people. And then it says in verse 9, people start crying. Yom Kadosh Hashem Elokeinu, Al Tis'ablu, Al Tivku. They read the Torah and they say, don't cry. Don't cry. Today's a special, beautiful day. Don't cry. Kibochim kolam, because they're all crying. Why were they crying? Because they felt they fell so far. They saw where they were, and they saw what they had to do, and they knew it was Rosh Hashanah, the day of judgment. So they were crying. That's what I would do. I would think, if I know I did the wrong thing, I want to cry. I'd want to fast. They did the wrong thing. They knew it. They heard the Torah. They said, "Oh my God, what do we do?" So I cried. And the sages told them, no. That's not it. In verse 10, it says, "Go and eat and rejoice and support the poor, because this is a holy day. Al ta'atzevu. Don't be sad, because it's the joy of God is your strength." Very, very fascinating thing, because it's a very scary thing to be judged. The day of judgment is the scariest thing in the world. So you got to develop a sense of fear and awe, and want to do the right thing, at the same time understanding that God is all compassion and loving. Now, not in the way that other religions, God forbid, talk about it, because they just abolish your responsibility. You have to become this great person. But he was telling them, listen, okay, you did the wrong thing. Fix it up. Fix it up. And have some trust. Have some trust. People have a child, they love their child. Right? Is there any normal person who doesn't love their child? So how can Hashem not love his creations? Hashem loves us infinitely times more than we even could love our kids, because we understand, we feel connection. So that's what he's telling them. So they're distraught because they know they were wrong and they got to fix it up. Can't have, well, you know what? God loves you. Do whatever you want to do. No. God loves you, and he knows you can do what's right, and he knows you should do what's right, and he knows you have to do what's right. And if he doesn't ask you to do what's right, then you're nothing. You're not a person. So they have to do it. But today was Rosh Hashanah, and he told them to go and to rejoice and to feed the poor and to let everyone else rejoice and to have trust in Hashem and to change their ways, which they did. And then what happens now on the second day afterwards, he gathers the people together. And now what they do is they start to go into some of the areas that they fell. Now, the laws of Sukkot, this is very strange because it says they kept Sukkot. And they didn't keep Sukkot like this from the time of Joshua. That's very strange because they obviously kept Sukkot many times. So I'm going to just tell you this because I need you to understand the basic understanding of the text. I can't have you reading things that, even though I'm going to tell you is brought in the sages, but I need to tell you because I can't have you reading things and saying, what does that mean? Do they not keep the Sukkot? I don't know how it is today, but they're arguing about it. But Washington, D.C. is supposed to not be part of the states because it's the capital is supposed to be owned by everyone. Where did the American founding fathers get this wild idea from? From the Torah. That's where they got it. Because Jerusalem is considered to be the place that is owned by everyone. It's not divided into the tribes. It's not considered to be, because if you'd set up, I don't know, Washington, D.C. is part of Virginia, so Virginia has the central thing. How much more so in our case of holiness? If the temple was centered in my tribe's land, then it would be, I have a superiority. It's not. It's owned by everyone. So there are laws about building a sukkah in a public ground. You can't do that. The sukkah has to be in your ground. So Ezra here set up a whole process where they were able to build the sukkah properly, the huts in Jerusalem, the city, even though it was public ground. They were able to build it, which is, I'm not going to get it now, but it's a big question in Jewish law. When you you build your hut, it's got to be in your property. You can't build someone else's property. So they kept certain aspects of the Sukkot in a fantastic, superior way. And this is what I wanted to get at, is because what happened was, even though Joshua, when he came to the land of Israel, he sanctified it, but then Ezra came back and he reestablished the second commonwealth, which is called the holiness remains forever. And that's in Jewish law, all those things right now. This holiness now continues forever, that when they came back, and it's one of the things I'm talking about today, which is coming back in a world where it's not so clear. And a lot of people have complaints, and they have stories, and they have politics, and you still could see, no, I'm doing the right thing. God is directing my life, and what I'm doing, the right thing. That's a very, very fascinating, incredible situation. And that's what Ezra did now. He read the Torah, and he explained to them, and they kept the laws. Okay? The people then started to, after the holidays, after the Chagim, they started to feel very bad about what they had done. It said they had met in chapter 9, they had married a non-Jewish women. They had to divorce them. The people stood up and they accepted upon themselves various things. Now, some of the things they accepted upon themselves were Torah laws they had to do, but they had fallen out a little bit from them. The keeping of the sabbatical year, the 7th year, is very difficult. And even years ago, people weren't, like there was a question not long ago, because in Jews today, many Jews keep the 7th year. They don't plow their land. The fruits are available for everyone. They're open. You don't own land. 7th year, everything returns. The land lays fallow. It's an incredible law. I mean, if you read it, it's in the Torah. One of the laws is that God says in the 7th year, leave the land fallow. So you say, how am I going to live? An agricultural society. Well, if the Torah is made up by a person, God forbid, the system only works one time. After people die of famine the first time, that stopped. But thank God, that's not what happens. So people saw a bumper crop in the 6th year. I wish I had this article. I once saw this. It was the most incredible article I saw. It was the last Shemitah cycle, the last round of the 7th year. There were 2 settlements up in the north in Israel. One kept Shemitah, one didn't. They were next door to each other. It was the most greatest picture I saw. It was amazing. There was some kind of storm, and it came through this area, and it destroyed everything. But it destroyed the kibbutz that was on the right side. It didn't keep Shemitah. The one that kept Shemitah, it didn't. You're looking at this picture, you're like, I cannot, this is crazy. It's literally next to each other. And one was destroyed. So those were some things that people may had a hard time. So Ezra here and the sages, they exhort the people, you got to keep everything in Torah. And there are some laws that were rabbinic laws that they put into place to make sure that they weren't going to fall. There were some laws they mentioned here about on the Sabbath, things that were not forbidden, but in the Sabbath, there are a lot of laws that Jews have that put fences around the Sabbath. Not all the Torah. We have a law that you should just know, because it's a verse in the Torah. The verse in the Torah says, God says to the sages of Israel to put a fence around the Torah. And so there were fences the rabbis and the Sanhedrin, the great court, were able to establish. And some of those were established here in some of these texts here. When it talks about the people bringing things on the Sabbath, you can't buy it, even though there's certain ways you could. The rabbis forbade certain things because they wanted they saw that the people practically make mistakes. When the Torah says a law, I'll give you an example. It's not my example. It's what the sages compare it to. You have an eye, okay? Everyone loves having an eyeball, right? Right? You can see it's great. So you say, I like having an eyeball, but what do I need an eyelid for? Right? It's for the makeup. Why do you need an eyelid? What's so great about an eyelid? Well, the answer is, if you didn't have an eyelid, you'd be blind in 5 minutes. The eye needs the protection of the eyelid. The Torah tells us the laws that are obligations, and the Torah said to the sages of Israel to put the fences around where people will not come to make mistakes, because it's a practical life. And that's some of the fences you see now that the sages in chapter 9, what they're establishing now, they're putting certain fences in place to go and to make sure that the people who have had the spiritual revival don't go and fall again. These things you have problems with, let's make sure we take it upon ourselves to be careful. These things are danger spots. Let's put fences around them. And that's what's happening in chapter 9. Now, also, in addition to that, in chapter 9, the Levites, Kohanim, start to recap history. And this is just so beautiful, incredible. They start recapping the history. Okay, God took us out of Egypt, did miracles for us, brought us to the land of Israel, and they go through the history. And that really, and by the way, it seems to be possibly a Torah law to learn history, because if you don't know what happened, how do you understand life? God took us out of Egypt. He did these miracles, brought us into the land of Israel. And then what happened? He brought us to Mount Sinai, gave us the Torah, split the Red Sea, brought us to the land of Israel, all these things. And then what happens is, but the people, and as they're recounting the story, the people, as they developed and as they got all of this greatness, if you look in chapter 9, verse 25, what happened was, in the middle of the verse there, it says, the people ate, they became satiated, they became fat, they adorned themselves, and the next one, in your goodness, and then it says they rebelled. And that is, unfortunately, the process. When people have troubles, they call out to God. When everything's good, So the people now, the revival of the people, the sages, the Kohanim are telling them, this is the history. You know this. What happened? You came to the land of Israel, you had the kings, you had the glory, you had the temple, and then you slipped because you got too comfortable. And by the way, this is the ultimate lesson in America. You got to know that. It's foolish what they're doing, trying to destroy the country and then say, oh, we get used to having less. That's absurdities. But the comforts that we have make us sometimes desensitized. They do. That's just the way it is. Person who gets too comfortable, satisfied, doesn't search, doesn't yearn, and that is the problem here. And that's what it says in the verses here. And then he basically, the Kohanim tell the people what happened. And because of that, this is what we got. The temple was destroyed. Went to exile for 70 years. And now Hashem brought us back. And now this is just what I really want you to understand. In the end of this book, in the end of chapter, middle of chapter 9, they're going to go and they're going to confirm all of these things. They're going to put it in writing. They're going to go and take it upon themselves to be strong, to keep the Torah. But you got to understand where they're looking at themselves right now. They knew they were at the highest heights. King Solomon built the temple. God's presence was revealed. They was destroyed in exile. They're in 70 years. And now they're coming back to the land of Israel. And they're coming back and they're paying taxes and under the servitude of the Persian kings. It's unbelievable. Terrible. It's desecration of God's name. And that's what they're saying right now. Okay? I'll show you in the verse here. After it says that they fell out, okay, Hashem saves us, verse 28. In verse 30 now, Vatimshach aleim shanim rabos, vata'ad ba'murocha, me'elav lo hazinu. People didn't listen. Okay? Verse 31, very important. And you and your compassion, Hashem rachamecha rabim lo asisam kala, the law azavtem. You never left the Jewish people. And this is where all of the people make a great mistake. What happened was destruction of the temple. Every destruction is not for purpose of destruction, it's purpose of rebuilding. Jews are coming into the period called the 3 weeks now, where the 3 weeks before the temple was destroyed, the 9th of Av. We don't look at it as the goal. The goal wasn't the destruction. The goal was fixing up what you've done wrong for the next level. And therefore, Hashem didn't destroy the Jewish people, and he never will. He never left us, even though he destroyed the temple and exiled us, but he made a covenant that his promise will always be with the Jewish people. He'll never abandon them ever. And that's a myriad of verses throughout the Torah, not just here, in Tehillim, in Torah, in the book of Dvarim. There's replete with verses that says, no matter what, Hashem is married to us, will not let them go. Verse 32 is the verse I want you to understand, because it sums up what I was trying to get to today. So after it says that Hashem destroyed the temple and it's going to bring us back, and we know it won't be us, but now Elokeinu, Akela Godla, Gibur Vanora, Shomer Abris, God who is great and mighty and awesome, who guards the covenant and the kindness. Do not go and let us be lost from these people that you're the Malkeinu, the Sharenu, the Kohenu, don't let us be lost here. From the kings of Ashur until this day, you protected us. Now, in this verse here, Nehemiah says something that is very, very important. We don't go and give God accolades because we don't know, we can't do that. We can't understand God. Say God's way. What are you going to say? The only reason why we're allowed to say those words because Moses said it in the Torah. Now, what happened was that when the temple was destroyed, people didn't know how to understand what was going on. How can I say God is all of these accolades that Moshe said in the Torah when the temple is destroyed and the evil people are prospering? And came along Nehemiah with the men of the great assembly and said, no, you don't understand. That is exactly the praise. You see, the praise is the temple was destroyed. They're all trying to kill the Jewish people, and they can't do it. That means, let me give you an example. Let's say I'm playing someone chess. Okay, he's good, I'm better, I win. Let's say I'm playing someone chess and I'm so good that every move they make is just playing into what I'm doing. There was never a game, there was never a contest. Everything they were doing was only me moving to the way I wanted to go. That's a much greater chess player, right? You hear the example? What happened here was that when the temple was destroyed, in one sense, it looked like, are we now thinking that God's greatness is no longer revealed? And the Nehemiah and the men of the great assembly now said, you don't understand. That shows God's infinite power. That even in a world that looks like it's bad, it looks like it's out of control, it looks like, they're bringing you to World War III and they don't know why, and you don't know what's going on and all this stuff, God's running the whole show. And that is this moment right now where they say, no, you don't understand. Don't think that God's greatness is not revealed because temples are destroyed. It's specifically because it's destroyed, and it's specifically because they're trying to wipe us out, and and it can't be done. God's running the show even in the hiddenness. That is the turning point in this this moment right now. This book of Nehemiah, we're up to in the 9th chapter, is the return to Zion. The return to Zion could have been miraculous, and it could have been through the hidden methods. And on one hand, you would think the miraculous way is better. But the answer is it's not exactly correct. Because to see that everyone is doing what they're doing, they're destroying the temple, they're in control, this guy's in charge, you got stuck in a pot. Kick the thing. You got stuck in politics. Politics are flying all over the place. And then you realize, no. It really is specifically all part of God's plan. You can't do anything against what his plan is. That's the ultimate statement of God's control. That's the 9th chapter. The people now accept upon themselves to go and to return to Zion, to realize they had fallen, made mistakes. They were sad, they were nervous, they were crying. And the sages told them, yes, you did wrong things. You got to fix up the wrong things you did. It's true. But you understand that there's a plan. Even in the midst of all this insanity, you just built the temple again. And you were guarding, you had the sticks, and you were guarding, you thought it was natural. And now you look and you say, whoa, this is really part of the grand plan. That's the ultimate statement of the praise of God. And ladies and gentlemen, I want you to understand, that's why I decided to learn the book of Nehemiah with you, because it's happening literally today. If you would have told a human being 200 years ago the Jews would be living in Israel, if you would have gone to King Ferdinand and told him the Jews will live in Israel, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? You're crazy. And the Talmud says the greatest sign the Mashiach is close is when the land of Israel will give its fruits again. So thousands of years ago, they said that's the sign it's happening. So I want you to understand that just like right now in the story of Nehemiah, when they all realize, they turn around, they say, okay, this wasn't supernatural, but it was all God running the show. And we made mistakes, and he didn't abandon us, and he brought us back, and now we're here, and all these things are happening, and it's him running the show. When we think we're running it, or you think this political guy is, and that political guy is, that is the ultimate statement, ultimate showing of God's infinite power. There's no other source of power. It's not like, oh, yeah, this president is strong, but God's strong. God forbid, that's ridiculous. And this is what they praise now. And that's when he gathers the people and he brings them back in. And he says, let's take upon ourselves to realize, to recognize, fix up what we did wrong, and take upon ourselves the covenant that we're never going down that path again. And that is now the turning point to what's called the Second Commonwealth and the building of the Second Temple, which really is the paradigm for the process of the Third Temple. Okay. Questions, comments, ideas?